Thanks everyone for joining. So I'm James. I head up all sales in the EMEA region for Pattern. So that's Europe and the Middle East. I'm speaking to you from our London office at the moment. So it's very dark and dingy outside. We're based in Soho, but all part of the fun. So what I'd like to talk about today is how we can help you win the tug of war that is global e-commerce. You know, there's effectively $6 trillion worth of opportunities sitting on the table. How can we strategically and sustainably get your brand in front of the relevant audience? And that's really what I want to talk about today. But first things first, let's set the or frame the conversation, I suppose. So if we look at the next slide, we're looking here at the GMV, the gross merchandise value by a country and continent. So if we naturally, your eyes will sway to the left and you look at North America, huge opportunities. You're looking at about $887 billion worth of opportunity in market if you're based in America at the moment and Canada. If you then move centrally, you'll look at Europe, another big opportunity at 500 billion. Of course, all the markets come with their own nuances and complications. But then if we sway to the right, you look at the APAC region, you know, the numbers are just gastronomical. So if you look at China as a market on its own, it's 2,779 billion. I can't believe I got that right at 8 o'clock at night, of opportunities sitting at the table. How can we help your brand get into those markets and penetrate the markets in a safe, protected, and protecting your brand way? So that's what we're going to talk about in a bit more detail. And if we go to the next slide, you'll notice a pattern from the GMV to where we're based globally. So we're actually headquartered in Lehi, in Utah. We were established about 10 years ago. We just had our 10th birthday and we traded over $1 billion on marketplaces globally. We actually did $1.2 billion on marketplaces globally last year, which was a huge milestone. We represent some phenomenal brands from the likes of Panasonic, North Face, but our founder, Dave, as I said, who set up the company 10 years ago, promised us a product when we hit that $1 billion revenue target. And there's now about 1,300 of us at the business. And we're hoping for TVs or something very cool like that. It was a cheese grater that got us above the line. So it was very frustrating that we all got cheese graters instead of TVs. But it's a great story. And as you can see, if you looked at that GMV earlier, we followed that path from North America through into Europe, into APAC. And we're now looking at establishing into other markets as well, such as India. It's a huge opportunity in marketplaces. So we followed that footprint very cleverly. So let's take a step back and look at internationalization as a whole. And I like to think of this as a sort of crawl, walk, run sort of philosophy. So if we go to the next slide, the best place to start is often the cross-border route. So test your demand. Lots of marketplaces will try in market, if you're in the States, for example, will try and say, look, get your product into the market and test the demand by going cross-border. So you can really get an understanding of if the consumer demand is there for your product. And once you've got that demand, or once you've seen that demand, you can then start to grow the demand by going through different channels, advertising below and above the line, influencers, micro-influencers, a great way to start building traction for your brand in those particular markets. And when you're comfortable with where you've grown that traction to, press the button and get the full localization piece, creating localized content for those particular markets. We work agnostically in many different particular markets, so we don't specialize in one. But at the moment, I'm speaking to lots of coffee companies, for example, in Europe. And it's so interesting when it's looking at localization is how you have to tailor your content based on the market, even in Europe. So, for example, if you speak about coffee in France, they would not have a clue what a milk frother is, for example. In Italy, they like black coffee and espresso. So it's about understanding your localized market to make sure that your content is on point for that consumer in each market. So if we go on to the next slide, how do you build out that proposition? You have to really think through this. And if you start with pricing, you know, we've spoken about taxes earlier in the conversation. There's so many different taxes and tax growth when it comes to pricing within each market. So it's about understanding how all of those taxes can affect your price point within the market. Have a look at the logistical element when it comes to pricing as well. How is that going to affect your product and getting it into market and the margin and the bottom line side of things? And at the moment, FX rates are fluctuating left, right, and center. How can you protect your brand from those FX fluctuations also? I love coming out to the States usually, but my pound doesn't get my bang for the buck that it used to. So, it's about thinking about your products and how they resonate within market on a pricing side. And then you need to look at ranging. Does your product range fit for that particular marketplace? If you're looking at selling in Luxembourg, which is landlocked, there's no point selling boats because they're not going to be that interested. So really, we wouldn't sell boats on marketplaces, but just an off-the-cuff sort of example. Is the marketplace right for your brand? Is it a discounted marketplace? Is it a full RRP, recommended retail price marketplace? Have a look at the intrinsic side of these marketplaces before you look to attack them. And also think about changing your range based on marketplaces. There are some brands out there that are selling individual items for under $5, for example, on marketplaces. That is not a particularly e-commerce friendly product. Think about bundling. Think about making the actual end consumer spend more and get more for that money, but reduce the logistical costs on the bottom of it. And then look at the regulatory and the compliance and the registrations and the regulations part of the piece. We spoke about it earlier. It is complicated in markets like Europe and in China, but there's great partners out there, and we work with the majority of them. We can help you literally pick up your product from the US or wherever you may be based and drop it in market with the correct regulations, the correct compliance details, and labeling in multiple markets and multiple languages. It's not just the labeling, it's your slogans often as well that can be a problem. There's certain things you can say in one market and not in the other. So you can't promise that a pill would increase fertility, for example, in one market in Europe, and another market you can't say that. So it's about understanding how you can promote your product in the best way when you get to that marketplace. So if we look at the next slide, we're looking at the pros and cons of selling on the cross-border model. Obviously, there's some great pros, and there's no local entity and setup that needs to be set up. It removes any barriers and constrictions about receiving payments in local currency. You don't have to localize labeling. And it can circumnavigate a lot of the regulatory concerns. It can produce quite a lot of stock pool decisions. And of course, consumers are driven by ease. If you look in China, they're most of the consumers focus purely on getting a delivery quickly. Whereas you look in Europe, it'd be on price. So if it's cross-border and it's going to take a week, is that going to actually entice a Chinese consumer to buy? And also, if you're in, let's say, the vitamins and supplement space, you have to be very careful about cross-border when it comes to vitamins and supplements and the regulations piece as well. So let's look at the next slide and look at the competencies we think you need to win big on global e-commerce. Insights. This is something we really drill into our brand partners. We have a whole insights team here that will help you understand the best markets to go into and why. Is that particular category that your brand is in growing? Who is the market leader within that category? How much market share do they own? What's their average price point within the market? Having a look at that whole is so important. And then how do you win and win big using traffic strategy once you're in market as well? So using technology, which the fundamentals of our business are based on technology and data. If we have that data and understand how to win new consumers in market, we can really leverage that at a low ROI. Localizing your content, your images, video, bullet points, and reviews, making sure that's in the local language that resonates with the brand. And as I said, making sure it resonates with that market as well. And then think about the logistical piece. How are you going to fulfill to that end consumer? Are you going to use an FBA route? Are you going to do D2C? How are you actually going to find the best way to get your product in the most efficient, sustainable, and timely manner? But the most important thing when going into new markets is protection. And it's a huge part of our business model. The one advantage of going into a market new is the fact you can protect from the beginning. We speak to hundreds of clients every year that there's been a price erosion issue where you've got hundreds of unregulated sellers, grey sellers, selling your product, not representing it in the best light online. Your consumer's getting a really bad customer journey. If you're going new into market, protect from the beginning to make sure that the consumer is seeing your product, is getting the right education on your product, and that you don't have a convoluted seller market. So very quickly, I'd like to go into how Pattern can help you in this really exciting journey. We have four main core pillars of growth when it comes to marketplaces and internationalization as a business. And I just touched on the most important, or one of the most important, being protection and control. If you're going into a new market, you can make sure that you keep on top of those unregulated sellers. And we're going to come into it in a second on how we can do that. I'm sure in market, especially if you're a well-known brand, you have to fight these grey sellers and unregulated sellers on a continual basis. There is a way, especially in Europe, especially in North America, China, we're working on at the moment, where you can really help restrict the amount of sellers in market. And that's going to do one thing. It's going to keep your price point stable. And it's also going to help your bricks and mortar channel as well. You know, resources is a huge part of this puzzle as well. If you think, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you just had to concentrate on what model you were going to go direct to consumer. Were you going to go direct, or were you going to wholesale to retailers to do it on your behalf, or both? And then online came along and you had to create your D2C channels. How are you going to service those D2C channels? And then we count marketplace as a whole separate channel as well. How are you going to have the resources to do that in one market? Never mind 15 that's in Europe and the beast that is, the APAC as well. So we can help you with the resource piece. We manage all of that for you. It's quite an Americanized saying, which is probably the right audience in that sense, but we like to move our brand partners from being a player to a coach. Instead of chasing chargebacks or having to try and find out where the stock has gone or why the stock's not being sold, you can think more strategically, where do we go next with that international expansion piece? As we are global, you can get your stock anywhere over the world and we'll look after it for you from there on in. So everyone's probably heard of the Amazon flywheel, and I'd like to quickly speak about how we sort of embedded this and grown it. If you look at the top and the middle, this is where you start. And the control piece is massively important, as I said. Once you get this control going, you're going to start seeing more stability of your price online and less price erosion. And your ASP, average selling price, may start to increase. What does that mean? That will give you more leverage with all of your retailers. They're not all fighting for that win on on Amazon or whatever marketplace you're using, because you have that stable price point. That brings you to a better relationship with your offline as well, because you're not fighting for that bottom dollar. Everyone's in cohesion and working together. So that control flywheel continues to grow at the same speed. But then if you move to the left-hand side, we come onto the growth part. Because you have less sellers on marketplaces, you'll then win more of the buy box. If you don't know what the buy box is, when you're on Amazon, it's not on every Amazon product page, but it's a box on the right which enables you to buy very quickly, increases conversion by four times. Once you own more of that buy box, you're going to have more improved ad consistency and performance, and you can start focusing rather on protection, on brand protection, bidding on branded key search terms. You can start looking at the longer tail keywords and understand how to grow your brand to new consumers rather than protecting branded search. And then you can really start to invest in your content, SEO, and customer service on the back of that. So very quickly, just before we finish off, how does our model work? It's very simple. Again, it's 4 steps. So we go through an assessment phase where we speak to our brand partners and see if it's a mutual fit, because we actually buy your stock. So we initially go in there and say, look, is this a mutually advantageous position to be in? Then we buy your stock in full for that particular marketplace. So within our total discount, you'll have that marketplace commission, the fulfillment cost for that particular product as well, and then our discount on top with a total discount. And once we've agreed that, all you literally have to do is ship that stock to our warehouses. Let's say we're talking about Europe, that will be in Poland or the UK. If you're talking China, we have multiple DCs all dotted over the APAC region. You get the stock to us, DDP, and then we manage everything from there on in. The fulfillment, the logistical side of things, advertising, SEO, managing your content. We manage it as a brand manager effectively as well. We work on all your compliance, and then looking at international expansion as well. Marketplaces can be a scary journey, but having a good partner can really help you maximize the opportunity that it brings. So I appreciate all your time.
James Bennett, thanks from Pattern for breaking it down. Again, I just want to highlight something there for people who are listening. They will buy your product. Of course, there is a barrier. Of course, there's a selection process. So they don't do this for everybody. But if, I would argue, you're lucky enough that Pattern says, hey, this is the right product at the right price point for the right market or for the right markets, we see a value here. First of all, that's a great hurdle and an affirmation that you are in the right direction, but then also a great partner to bring you global. So
Appreciate it, Joshua. Have a good day.